Support for this podcast comes from Frito-Lay and the 2023 Snack Bracket Championship. The Frito-Lay Snack-It Challenge is underway, and fans are voting on their favorite snacks to crown champion. We're talking about prime-time matchups between the best 64 snacks in the land. Will Ruffles Ridges reign supreme? Can Doritos defend their dynasty? Or will Smart Food use their smarts for a surprise upset? Only you can decide. Get in on all the action for a chance to win up to $1,000 or a year's worth of snacks. Let your snacks be heard. Just go to fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com to vote and enter for a chance to win. No purchase necessary. Sweepstakes ends April 3rd, 2023. Void where prohibited. Year's worth of snacks awarded in the form of 52 coupons, each good for one bag of chips. See official rules at fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com.
This is the Black Gold Banneret Podcast. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Sharon and Eric Lopez.
Welcome to the show. Jeff, Eric, and Drew with you here on the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. We can officially say football season is on the way. It was Media Days this week, gentlemen. We had UCF Media Day. We had American Athletic Conference Media Day. We're saying cliches into microphones again, fellas. It's back.
Yay, coach speak.
it's all back.
Well, we needed this spark after the bummer news that Jeopardy's settling on Mike Richards as their host permanently. Like, what is that?
He's the producer of the show. Basically, he chose himself.
They swung for the fences and they got a base hit.
So what happens when Aaron Rodgers decided to just play football instead, I guess?
I think you know what? That's an interesting point. I think they might have been counting on Aaron Rodgers. Anyway, we'll talk about that. We have a guest on the show this week. Joe Broback from Underdog Dynasty gives us a look at the American in general, just kind of zooming out, looking at the whole conference as we set up for the 2021 season. Bryson Turner joins us later on to talk about week 2 of the Olympics for UCF athletes competing, including the end of the line for the great Phil Dalhouser. But we start with media days in the American. And the big story actually coming in for UCF with their media day earlier this week was Bentavious Thompson. Credit to Jason Beatty from 247. He actually noticed first that Benno was suspiciously absent from the team's roster earlier this week, and come to find out when we got a hold of Coach Gus Malzahn, that when we asked him, "Hey, what's up with Benno?" he said he confirmed that Bentavious Thompson is no longer on the UCF roster. He did wish him well. Everything is very cloudy around this, Eric Lopez, which is kind of. Well, I was about to say it's unusual. It's not really that unusual. But I guess the first thing is, does anyone have any indication of what happened here?
No, we don't. Nobody knows. Nobody inside knows. They're doing a good job keeping it hush, whatever it was. So, hopefully it's nothing too serious for his sake. I mean, who knows what's going to happen. But, Gus was to the point. He's no longer with the team. And, look, this is where the transfers come in now. This is why they made the transfer moves they did. And Gus even said this on Media Day on Wednesday in the American that, this is a young football roster. And that's one of the reasons why he's got a guy like Mark Anthony Richards coming over from Auburn, who's the guy I always felt like would be the guy at running back, just because obviously the ties with Auburn and the system. He probably knows the system with Gus better than any of the running backs on the roster. So UCF's going to go multiple backs. I don't think it's that big of a loss. I know people love Beno Thompson and his abilities, but I don't believe if you're going to lose a player in a position, the running back position is not a position where UCF is hurting. And I think regardless whether he, if he was still on the roster or not, that was still going to be youth on that roster and that running back position. And again, I think it, Gus in his past usually goes with a couple of backs, unless he has a Trey Mason that just kind of just takes it all over. But I'm not as concerned about it. I didn't get a sense that anybody's concerned about it, but it's always bummer from a depth standpoint to lose a player as talented as Thompson.
Also bummer from the fact that he's a senior too. I mean, you like to see guys finished out, obviously, but also there's some institutional memory I think that heads out the door with Benno. Drew, you have looked and seen, what UCF has remaining on there. Give us a sense from your perspective of the talent that UCF has at the running back position, because we've been through this before with guys leaving it. Prior to last year, boy, UCF lost a lot of depth in the running back position. Everything seemed to turn out just fine, though. Benno, granted, as big of a contributor as he was, is just one guy, and there are a lot of guys who are have that next man up mentality, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's football in a nutshell. It's, next man up. And you talked about this being a young group, and it really is. You have Isaiah Bowser, the transfer from Northwestern. He's the only senior left as far as running backs. So, this is a young group. You talk about Mark Anthony Richards. He's a redshirt sophomore. So he's still got a good amount of play time left. So, as far as experience, Bowser's your guy, but you have a number of players that have at least some game experience, not a lot, but some. Mark Anthony Richards only had 20 carries with Auburn. So he's the only benefit he has is he knows the Gus Malzahn offense, but he hasn't had much game experience. And you have Demarius Good, Trillian Coles. Those guys have had some experience. Johnny Richardson's, I think, the biggest beneficiary here. I think he moves up to your third running back. You have Richards, you have Isaiah Bowser as your bruiser back, and then you have Johnny Richardson. The problem with Bentavious Thompson coming into 2021 is he dealt with injuries in late 20 and in the offseason. He lost a lot of weight. He was no longer the bruiser type that we saw last year. He was more of a quicker runner, which when you look at it was he's probably going to get lost in the shuffle a little bit because they have so many shiftier guys. So we don't know what happened, but I know he went through a lot of physical issues in the off season that could have played a role leading up to him no longer being part of the program.
Yeah. So real quick, if it was expected that Benno would have been number one on the depth chart, Drew, I'll ask both of you real quick. Drew, I'll start with you. Who now do you think is the number one guy?
I think it's going to be Mark Anthony Richards is the number one guy, but Isaiah Bowser is going to get a lot of work. You don't want to put your bruiser as your number one guy. You want to be able to utilize him in more situational, third and short towards the goal line. So while he's the most experienced, I think Richards is ultimately going to be the starter.
Eric, what about you?
Yeah, I'm with Drew, and I think there's going to be multiple backs used, and I think Drew's dead on point. I always felt that Richards was going to be the guy, regardless if Beno Thompson was in the roster or not. And I kind of felt like Thompson was probably going to be maybe fighting for second, to be honest. So, look, it's a young team. I think it's going to be interesting. The conference obviously came out with their preseason poll, and UCF was picked second. They got 2 first-place votes, and it was interesting to see some of the reactions like, oh, come on. And I'm thinking to myself, that's actually pretty fair because we have to accept there's going to be a transition period here. Drew, right? I don't expect things to go smoothly, and I think some people maybe think that's going to go smoothly, but this is part of the process here.
Oh, absolutely. There's going to be an adjustment period. And we saw that in the spring game, which unfortunately was not streamed. So not many people got to see it. But take a player like Jalen Robinson, who just absolutely broke out last year in the air raid. He pretty much disappeared in the spring game and struggled to gain any separation. Whereas Ryan O'Keefe, who's smaller but faster, was able to just thrive in this Malzahn offense. Granted, it wasn't fully installed and players are still learning it, but we're starting to see some nuances as far as, players that picked up on it real quick, and then players that didn't quite get it as fast. But that's the spring. There's months in between. We're just now getting the fall practice, but I want to throw out real quick a wild card player that could cause some disruption later in the season. That's RJ Harvey. That guy was a beast during the spring game. His problem is just he's raw. And as Gus Malzahn,
former quarterback and is coming over from Virginia.
Absolutely. And he's just so athletic. and he's still learning the role. I mean, here's the truth. Kalia Davis, defensive lineman Kalia Davis has more running back experience than RJ Harvey, because Davis was a running back in high school and Harvey was not. So, I mean, the truth is he's still learning the role, but I think he's actually got the highest ceiling because he's so athletically gifted. We watched him during the spring game, and Jeff, you saw this while you were there. That guy was impossible to tackle. He hit hard.
Yeah, I called his name a lot that day. Yep.
Yes, you did, and he got a lot of chunk plays. So I think he's going to be a wild card later in the year as he gets a little more experience, gets a little more comfortable, because, as Gus Malzahn said, he was very nervous getting going, and he got better as the game went on because he got more comfortable. So I think he just needs more seasoning. Yeah,
he's a little small, 5'8", 195, but boy, he did not play small in that game. I'm actually looking at that. I was like, I remember looking at his vitals, and it said he was 5'8". I'm like, that dude's 5'8" because he's running like he's at least 6 feet tall,
and he hits like he's 210.
Yeah, so that was really surprising. Edgewater High School grad. So that should be. I don't know. That's why we have spring practices to shake this stuff out. But let's talk about media day in general. Eric, we'll start with you. Any surprises other than the Benno thing, obviously, that came out of there, or notable things that Coach Malzahn talked about either during the UCF availability or during the American availability earlier today?
Not really. I mean, I think he talked a lot about Dylan Gabriel's growth as a leader and his leadership that he has shown, I think, is part of it. I think he talked about he's for the 12-team playoff. He does not believe that the Oklahoma-Texas going to the SEC hurts it at all. He quote unquote, it's anybody that thinks that is bull, was his words. So I think it's more of the process. He talked about, obviously,
Gus unplugged. I love it.
Right. I mean, he talked about the vaccination. Obviously, his team is around 70%. That is significant. Obviously, as we're talking, the first opponent, Boise State's already in a COVID issues already. So that's going to be a significant story. That was a significant storyline throughout the American. Everybody was asked about it, which got so many different answers from different schools, which is so fascinating on that. But no, I think the players are excited. I think they're looking forward to playing. I know one of the players said, well, they could beat, Auburn, and we could beat, Ole Miss, and that somehow made headlines. That's when nothing really happened, when we're trying to come up with nonsense storylines like that. Like, what do you want the kid to say? I don't think we could beat anybody in the SEC. Jesus Christ. The media is
it's a trap.
I thought that was interesting, and I got to give credit to Trace Trilco, because he pushed Luke Fickell of Cincinnati on the vaccination thing, and Luke kind of dodged the question, and I thought that
yes, he did.
That was a pretty that was pretty telling. I don't know if he dodged the question because he was afraid of disclosing anything.
I think he was just afraid of Trace in general. Trace could be intimidating in the question Q&As. I could tell you.
Put yourself in. If you put yourself in Luke's shoes, right? Like, you're either worried that you're going to disclose medical information inadvertently and potentially break the law, which you don't want to do, obviously, or the vaccination rate at Cincinnati is so low that it's embarrassing to him and he doesn't want to say anything about it. Which one do you think is more likely?
It's probably not where he would like it to be, probably. That's probably a part of it. For example, Navy, Kenny Amatolo said that they're at 100%. So
yeah,
usually teams that are pretty high percentage already know, pretty much are not too shy to, brag about it.
Well, the Navy guys are pretty disciplined about things.
Yeah. So I don't know. Look, this is a thing that's going to be pretty a common question here in the preseason, and I'm sure everybody has differences of opinion on it. And I think some of them don't like addressing it in general. I think some don't mind it. So I think it's kind of all over the place. The interesting thing that came out, Mike Oresco did say there will be no rescheduling this year. One of the big points he said in his long media segment, which was over a half hour, was the fact there will be forfeits. There will not be rescheduling. So in conference games. So if the team can't play, that's going to be a forfeit, no contest. And we've seen this in the postseason in the spring. So that's something to keep in mind. So however coaches feel about it and however players feel about it, That's I think a motivation now. They will not get a second win by, hey, let's get out of this game by not playing it. That you're not going to see that. You could see some forfeits this season as far as conference games. I don't know if that applies to non-conference. I think that's a lot harder to agree on considering you're in two different conference teams. But as far as conference games, you're not going to see a rescheduling. I thought that was one of the highlights or significant points that Mike Oresco made today in his media day on Wednesday. So whether people better just make sure they don't get the situation. And Gus mentioned that. They believe they have a good plan. They're obviously worried about the tracing, but they believe they can handle it. And he said no excuses, that they're prepared for it.
I think those comments are underrated in the fact that they're following, I believe, the SEC model with the forfeits. I think that I don't think it's getting enough attention as far as the significance of that. Last year there was so much uncertainty and they tried to juggle things and it caused a lot of upheaval. Now it's, look, we have an option. If you choose not to take it and something goes wrong, that's on you. So I think that sends a very loud message to the players and the coaching staff. And, to the question before about, Luke Fickell, I think it's a combination of both. But I think part of that is just a gross misunderstanding of like HIPAA law and all that, which most people don't really understand what it actually applies to.
Yeah, so I think we've learned that.
Yeah, so I think people are overly defensive on not trying to say anything for fear of something coming back to them, thinking it's illegal, but it's really not. But right now it's a personal choice, and players are going to make their personal choices. Coaches are going to make their choices. But there's a risk involved, and the league has flat out said, look, we want 100% vaccination if possible. So here's the deal. If, forfeit if you can't go forward. So, hopefully message received by all the members of the American. We don't want to see any canceled games, especially not from UCF standpoint. Yeah. I want to see a full season of football. There's bound to be something that goes wrong somewhere.
Yeah, the hammer is there. They're waiting for the opportunity to bring it down on somebody. I think that, I'm really curious as to what other conferences do in the wake of that. Do you think that what the SEC and the American are doing right now, is that going to be like the MO for everyone going forward?
I think so. I think with the vaccine out there, with the statistics and data that support the usage of it, at this point, the conference will be like, there's no excuse at this point. You do this or you leave it up to fate.
Yeah. Well, and it's a pain in the neck to reschedule. I mean, that was not a pleasant experience last year to just constantly shuffling schedules. Trust me, we had
college football on at least once every day of the week.
Right.
You are crazy for rescheduling. Remember in 2017 when the conference had to reschedule USF and UCF games because of the hurricane that came through? I mean, that affected 8 different teams in the American.
Yeah.
Don't even bring up the hurricane season. I mean, that's
you just even rescheduling a pair of games or one game can cause a massive amount of upheaval.
I don't think we're going to see forfeits. I think what we're going to see is what we saw last year when Temple came to town with literally 45, 50 players on the roster, maybe?
They were basically pulling people from the stands.
Yeah.
Very thin.
That sideline was awfully empty.
And you might see a situation like we saw in the NFL last year where the Denver Broncos literally had to play without a quarterback. That's what happened. And I think you're going to see, you will see that at some point this year in the college game, maybe in the pro game too, as the Minnesota Vikings evidently currently have their problems in the NFL. But I think that's what we're going to see. I don't think a team is going to forfeit, but I do think that it's going to be the bare minimum. And I think that's the thing to monitor in the next few weeks. Because last year there was a rule, like you had to be at a certain number from a roster standpoint to be able to play.
Yep, 53 was the number.
Will that stay? Will that be the same number moving forward? That could be the biggest, most important number for all these rosters as the season goes on. So that's the key there, because I think teams will play shorthanded if they can. But it's we'll see. Hopefully we don't have too many of those.
Now, to that point, UCF just brought in a walk-on quarterback, Andrew Brito. Andrew Brito from UMass, redshirt senior. So he's just got 1 year of eligibility. What you do is you take him and you segregate him. And you keep him away from the other guys, because if something goes wrong, you always
laugh, but you're right. You're right.
Yeah,
I mean, you have
set him up in an apartment in Ocala or something like that.
It's the designated survivor method. You got to have a guy ready to be the man if something goes horribly wrong, and cross your fingers that it doesn't happen. But you have to, at this point, assume that a worst case scenario can happen. Someone asked on Twitter, why bring him on? And my response is, you can never have too many quarterbacks, especially right now. Yep. So UCF has 5 quarterbacks. Brito did not cost a scholarship as a walk-on. So, he's a roster spot, but they got plenty of roster spots. It's the scholarships they're limited on. And, there's your designated survivor. He may not be, a world beater, but at least he can be on the field if something horrible happens.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. All right. We'll wrap up that. And by the way, I did want to go recap. Eric, you did mention it earlier, but I just wanted to reiterate the preseason media poll. 22 votes for Cincinnati, first place votes, that is. 2 for UCF. Nobody else got any first place votes.
No, that's expected.
Yeah, that was expected. I will say this, and I'm going to ask Joe Broback the same question, but I'll ask you guys right here. Is the gap between Cincinnati and UCF that much, or is it less, or is it more? What is it? Eric, you first.
I think the better question is the gap close from SMU and Houston to UCF and Cincinnati? I think both UCF and Cincinnati could be suspect. I think SMU I like a lot. And we're going to find out if Sonny Dykes can actually coach a football game this year, because he's got talent on that roster. Same for Dana Hogerson. I think they both have talent. SMU gets to host UCF in November. We've talked about that in the previous podcast. So I think the gap is close. Cincinnati, even last year, they're not a team that's going to blow people away on the scoreboard. Like, they're going to fight. They're going to dominate the line of scrimmage, but they're not going to win 30-10, 30-17. They're going to win by 7 to 10 points. And I think Cincinnati, their season could go 2 completely different ways. And I say that because you look at their schedule. They play Indiana. Drew, is Indiana going to be the second best team in the Big Ten again this year? Is that possible?
As long as their quarterback stays upright, they have a very realistic chance of making a lot of noise in the Big Ten.
So that's a significant game. And they go to Notre Dame. If Cincinnati were to win both of those games, Cincinnati's going to be in the top 15 at worst in the preseason polls. If Cincinnati were to win both of those games, now they're talking playoffs. I think they're in the playoffs at that point, assuming they win out in the American. I know you both don't believe the American can get in. I disagree. We've disagreed for years on that. But I think if Cincinnati wins, this is the type of schedule you need to get into the playoff. However, if they lose to Indiana and they lose to Notre Dame, this season could go south real fast for them. Even though their schedule conference-wise is pretty favorable, I think it's a boom or bust year for Cincinnati, and that could open the door for a UCF. I think it opens the door for SMU and Houston. I think UCF still has questions with the youth. I think they're a year away. I do believe they're a year away. I think the tough first half of the schedule is tough, with possibly Boise at home, at Louisville. You got to go to Cincinnati. You go to host Memphis. That's all in the first half of the schedule. I think this is a much more wide-open conference than it's been in a while. I think you can make a case for 4 teams to win the league, and at the same time, I could see the league costing themselves a bid to New Year's 6.
You hear that, Drew? Eric is selling UCF at number 2. He is selling that stock. Oh, my gosh.
Well,
Drew, what about you? What's your answer on that one?
My answer is the real gap is closer. UCF gets the negative on the unknown. You have a new coaching staff, a new offensive philosophy, new defensive philosophy. So you're dealing with the unknown of how that's going to translate into game time. Are these guys able to move from system to system? Is Dylan Gabriel just a system quarterback, which is what's been dogging him right now while everyone gets upset when they see the rankings and he's not in the top 5? It's because he's viewed as a system quarterback. Now he's in a different system that's not viewed as, quote unquote system. It's more of a real, offense as opposed to just air it out and hope for the best. Will he adapt? Spring game says yes, but obviously spring game is not real game. Will other players adapt? How does the new concepts of the offensive line, translate into the game? There's so many variables. How does this, new defensive line going to work? That's what hurts UCF in
secondary's got questions. You lose a Jim Thorpe finalist. The best player, best defensive player they've had in the program in a while. That's a question mark. Is the linebacker play going to improve? I think there's a lot of questions with this roster that still have to be answered, and it could take a while to answer. Look, could UCF win the league? Of course they can. They could go 11-1, 12-0, win the league. I could also see them going 9-3 and 8-4, and I know some people won't like that, but I think that's what I'm talking about. I think you could tell me any prediction you want about UCF, Cincinnati, SMU. I'm still more skeptical on Houston, but if you told me one of those teams is 11-1, I could believe it. But if you told me either of those four teams is 9-3, I would believe it too. I do think there's a gap between those four teams and the rest of the league. Do you guys agree or disagree with that?
Oh, absolutely. But I've also said 8-4 is the bottom end of UCF's range.
Agreed.
They could go from undefeated to 4 losses. And as we've seen during the 25-game winning streak, it was 1 or 2 lucky bounces that made the difference. And then during the hype layer, the lucky bounces started to stop, especially in 2019. Otherwise they could have run the table that year too. In fact, that was actually the best team that they had during the Frost/hype layer was that 2019 squad. I'll fight anyone over that one. They were just top to bottom, just absolutely stacked, especially on defense. So there's a lot of question marks, and it's going to take luck. Sometimes it's better to be lucky.
Special teams has got questions. We don't know the kicking game situation. I mean, that could decide a game or two. Is this team going to get any production out of the return game? I mean, that could decide a game as well. I mean, SMU's had good special teams. Cincinnati. Yeah. It's just those small things, and all we know is there's more questions, I think, on this UCF team than there's been in years. Doesn't mean that's bad. Obviously, there's talent, there's potential, but they got to prove it on the field, and we don't know who's going to stand out and who doesn't once the lights go on.
Well, it's the largest coaching philosophy change since O'Leary to Frost.
Yeah,
and you went from a pro style to a spread to an air raid, which is not a huge difference. But now you're going air raid to a no-huddle, more conventional offense, which is actually going to be really – I don't think everyone really understands how different this offense is going to look compared to last year. Gus Malzahn may have literally written the book on the no-huddle offense, but this is not going to be a air-it-out offense. It's going to be a lot of short and mid-range. It's going to be quick plays, but sustained drives to wear defenses down and to keep your defense fresh, which is why I have a lot of high hopes on the defense, because they're not going to be put in as many precarious situations that they were put in last year. But again, it's a lot of question marks going
with a tough schedule. With a tough schedule where you have to go tough schedule. You got to go to Navy, which we haven't even discussed. If they find the quarter, and I think Navy will be better. Remember, they didn't even block. They didn't go physical contact leading into the season, and I think it clearly affected them the whole year. They depend on physical contact. If they find a quarterback to run that triple option that they run, they're not going to be an easy team to beat in Annapolis either. That's going to be a tough game for UCF, and it's just, they go to Cincinnati, you go to SMU. Those are arguably some of the toughest places to play in the league.
Yeah, UCF has always struggled with at SMU. They've always won, but the games have never been pretty. They've always been 17.
Never been blowouts either. Yeah, there was that game in the ice.
Yeah,
that they played in 13. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, where Blake Bortles basically carried the team with a couple of rushing touchdowns because they couldn't move the ball. The field was frozen. So you're right. It's a tough schedule. I think SMU is a great dark horse. I think they're a little bit underrated. And can definitely make a run. I'm selling on Houston. I have lost faith in Dana Holgorsen.
No, you and me both, but they have talent. That's all I'm saying. I agree with you, but they do have talent.
They do have talent, but you can't put it together. So, I mean, I would put Memphis as a bigger threat than Houston in the standings between those two.
Interesting. All right. Well, we will be sorting this out starting actually 4 weeks from now. It's we're recording this on Wednesday night, August the 4th. So 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks from Thursday the 5th, it's showtime. It's September the 2nd, that opener for UCF against Boise State. So we'll be taking a look at that, and we're going to be starting our previews post haste here on Black and Gold Banner. Drew, you're going to be doing a lot of position previews. We're all going to be chipping in on that. We'll have our annual 5 biggest questions facing UCF football just prior to game week, and then we'll be previewing the Boise State game leading up to that Thursday night kickoff between the Knights and the Broncos. So this is going to be a pretty wild 4 weeks as we get ready for this football season. Now, more American talk coming up when we return. Joe Broback from Underdog Dynasty joins us to get the lay of the land on how UCF is being viewed outside of UCF within the conference, and some of the things we learned about what's going on with some of these teams that we have been talking about in this preview when we return. It's the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Don't go away.
Today's episode is brought to you by Cars.com. With over 2 million vehicles and 50,000 more added every day, Cars.com will match you with the perfect car for you, your budget, your life, your style. And if you're ready to say goodbye to your current car, Cars.com will get you an instant offer to cash it in. Just start by entering your license plate and get matched with a local dealer who will write you the check. So whether you're looking to buy or sell, just go to Cars.com. It's magical.
All right, welcome back to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Jeff Sharon with you here. Joining me now, he's a staff editor for Underdog Dynasty, covering the American and most notably the Houston Cougars. But really, he just keeps his eyes wide on the American Athletic Conference. So he's been quite busy in the last couple weeks. Joe Broback joining us once again from Underdog Dynasty. What's up, Joe?
Hey, Jeff. How you doing?
Good, man. Thanks for taking some time for us. We've got American Athletic Conference Media Days going on now, and the smell of football is in the air. This is all hitting a little bit too quickly, if you ask me, but here we are. You've done so much work over the last several years, and in particular this offseason covering the American. What is the competitive state of the league right now on the field? Is it, even after COVID, it seems like the American, depending on who you ask, whether they're in the conference or not, could be the 5th best conference in the country. Now with the Big 12 and all the trouble that we've seen so far, which we'll get to a little bit later, there could be some openings for the American. But just in general right now, in terms of the competition that we see on the field heading into 2021, the general status of the league in your eyes.
Oh, man. I think last year was kind of a year where we started seeing a little bit of the potential of what everybody in the AAC knew, but I don't think the rest of college football did. And that's, the work that UCF put in 2017 and 2018. And then we saw, Memphis in 2019 and then Cincinnati last year really put the foundation of this is a conference that means business. This is a conference that wants to be associated with those top conferences in college football. And now I think a lot of people thought that the AAC was catching both the Pac-12 and the Big 12. So this Big 12 news, obviously, this has been a crazy offseason. I think we all can agree on that.
It's been a crazy few weeks.
Right. Well, yeah, even though just the last few weeks would be a crazy offseason. But I think that the Big 12 announcing or having their issues, whatever they're going through, Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC, and the rest of the other 8 trying to figure out what they're going to do. I think this is as close as we've ever been to something that I think a lot of us said Power 6. And I think like 75% of the time we were kind of like joking Power 6 with like a 25%, like, no, we're kind of serious. And now that 25% is starting to creep up a little bit more. I think they're in a great place. I think they have the teams that maybe they're not on the level of the SEC and the Big 10. I think there's definitely a gap there, but I think they're moving up in the right direction. And if they can get a couple teams from the Big 12, not saying that they're going to, I don't want to get any legal trouble from I don't want Bob coming after me. But
no cease and desist letters.
Yeah, no, I don't need any of those. I'm good there. I think they're in a great place. Talent-wise, they've always been there. They've been dominating the group of five, if you will. I've been getting a lot of crap for saying that, so I apologize for anybody's offended about that, but it's just how I differentiate between the five and the other five. So they've really been the best amongst the group of five. I don't think anybody can argue against that, and I think the next step was putting themselves among the best five conferences in all of college football. So we're in a great spot if you're an AAC fan, and I think that things are only going to get better from here.
Today, the American released their preseason media poll. Cincinnati was tab number one. They got 22 of 24 first place votes. UCF comes in second, but I think a pretty clear second, at least in this, as far as the conference media is concerned. Let's give the Bearcats some due here. They finished last year number 8. They've been, according to the American, ranked in 28 consecutive national polls dating back to October of 2019, and they've won 20 games in a row at home. We saw how their season ended last year in heartbreak in the Peach Bowl to Georgia, but Desmond Ridder is back, and Luke Fickell once again has a pretty talented squad on his hands. Do you believe that there is, I guess, as large a gap between Cincinnati and UCF or anyone else in the conference as apparently the media does, or is this going to come right down to maybe the last weekend?
Yeah, I mean, you look at like 3 years ago, Cincinnati was a 4-8 team, and obviously things can change very quickly, as both Cincinnati and UCF have found out. When you hire a Josh Heupel and he almost ruins the program, you kind of have some building back to do, but the talent that Malzahn's bringing in, it gives them a chance to just jump right back in. But yeah, Cincinnati is definitely, Luke Fickell's been building a great program. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think that he's brought in talent that makes it really not that surprising that they're the best team in the conference. And if you look at their roster this year, defense is going to be loaded again, and they're going to be one of really a few teams in all of college football that's going to play really good defense. Pretty much the only one in the AAC, in my opinion, that's going to play good defense. And then you look at the offense, they have Desmond Ridder back for another year, depending on how you feel about him, whether he's your QB1 in the conference or if it's Dylan Gabriel. It kind of depends on that debate. They have talent everywhere else too. Wide receiver, they'll be good. Jerome Ford will be good at running back. They have to replace 2 tackles, which is a big key. But when you have a quarterback like Ridder who's mobile and can do that kind of stuff, they'll be just fine. But yeah, I think there is a gap right now, but it's a gap that we've seen before, because the gap between, if you think of 2017 when UCF was running everything, the gap between them and everybody else felt like it was pretty big. And then, Memphis almost got them a couple of times. So you quickly realize that this conference is very fluid. Doesn't matter who you are, even if it is Cincinnati. And, they have a new defensive coordinator coming in. So that's going to take some time for people to get used to. They got a couple big games in their non-conference schedule against Indiana and Notre Dame. So a loss or two there could kind of affect their chemistry. And then that leaves the door open for a UCF or even maybe an SMU to kind of jump on them. You had a great series on Underdog Dynasty, and I encourage everybody to check it out. I'm going to link to it in the show notes, where you broke down the top 50 players in the American, and you had Dylan Gabriel ranked ahead of Desmond Ridder. You had Ridder at 10, you had Gabriel at 2, behind Ahmad Gardner at Cincinnati, who individually and as part of a unit has given Dylan Gabriel fits over the years. But what is it about Dylan Gabriel from outside the UCF bubble that people fear that he brings to the table? Well, I think the biggest thing is that people have trouble when they think about rankings. Everybody, because the NFL runs the world, or at least the country, people are just automatically think, oh, well, you think Dylan Gabriel is a better pro prospect than, or Desmond Ridder is better, or Dylan Gabriel is better. One of the two, whoever you want, is better as a pro prospect than them. And I don't look at it like that. I look at it, you take their talent into consideration, but you also take into account the statistics that they're going to put up. So obviously everybody knows that Dylan Gabriel is going to have a better statistical year than Desmond Ridder, just based on the offense that they've run, the weapons that he has. And Dylan Gabriel's not that far behind in terms of his traits that does Desmond Ridder. I know a lot of people like what Desmond Ridder brings to the table, but I think the fact that people just associate Dylan Gabriel as a pass first quarterback just because Heupel basically just said, hey, we're going to run 1 or 2 man routes most of the time. Just chuck it to the first read if he's open, and then just do a check down if you have to, if he's not open. And I don't think people realize that he was originally recruited to go to Army, and Army is not throwing the football 40, 50 times a game or all season. So I think people just assume that all he can do is throw, and really he's a good runner. If you go back and watch his film, he runs really well. Now, obviously UCF prefers him to throw the ball because that, it takes away the chance of injury. But I think the fact that people are still underrating Dylan Gabriel just because they think he was a system quarterback with Heupel. All he does is just chuck the ball deep and let his guy go get it, which part of that is true when you have a talent on the roster like UCF has. Sometimes, you're going to throw the ball up because Jalen Robinson and Ryan O'Keefe are just so much faster than whoever they are. Like, it's really not that hard sometimes. I think they're obviously very intricate offenses and concepts that people run, but sometimes it's literally backyard football. Hey, Jalen, you're faster than whoever you're going against. I'm just throwing it to you. Go get it. So I think that people just assume that Dylan Gabriel is just a good college football quarterback and not just a good quarterback overall. So I take a lot of things into consideration. It's not just what they're going to do at the next level, because we're talking about college football. So let's talk about the present instead of what they're going to do in the future.
It's interesting that you brought up that point about, the fact that he was recruited to Army, and, obviously Army, like you said, they run the ball, or they throw the ball about once in a blue moon. And it would have been really, there's some other alternate universe where he did go to Army, and then we never would have learned about Dylan Gabriel's arm. But, now that he's playing for Gus Malzahn in a system that ostensibly will be much different than Josh Heupel's classic air raid, like you said, we're going to see, at least from what I've been able to glean, a lot more of an emphasis on running the ball. It's going to be the term that I have used when people have asked me about it is it's going to be a much more frosty offense than the air raid that we saw. What is it from outside the UCF bubble? What does Gus Malzahn bring to the table at UCF that has people around the Americans sitting up and taking notice?
Well, you look at the fact that Malzahn, won a national championship when he was the OC at Auburn with Cam. I mean, when you have Cam Newton, it's kind of hard not to win. But he also he also brought a Nick Marshall-led team, a guy who played safety, to the national championship, and they nearly beat Florida State that year. And so I think that the fact that he has the winning experience, and honestly, I'll say this again now. When UCF hired Heupel, I wasn't really sold on it. I didn't think he was going to be bad, but I wasn't like, this is the guy that's going to keep UCF on the national spotlight. And granted, in 2018, he did really well, but I was like, this is a guy who his program is not going to be overall an elite program. And honestly, at times I compared his offense to kind of AAU basketball. It felt like, hey, we're just going to let the natural talent of our players take over. We're not going to run anything super intricate every single play, but we're just going to let kind of the talent go from there. So I think people kind of just got sick of, if that doesn't work, they're kind of screwed. And I feel like Gus Malzahn brings in a different recipe that people aren't used to seeing. You're kind of seeing it with Cincinnati with Luke Fickell. He's doing a balanced approach. Everything off the field, on the field, offense, defense, special teams, that kind of stuff. They're really trying to find a way to balance everything. The fact that Gus Malzahn has been successful against the best coach that we've ever seen in the sport, in Nick Saban, like you get a different sense that he knows how to win at the highest level, and he brings just a different approach. I think a fresh start is what UCF needed, especially after last year. Very frustrating if you're a UCF fan. If you're a fan of underdogs and watching teams like Tulsa kind of rise up, that was fun. But obviously, if you're a UCF fan, not as much. So I think that just a fresh start is probably the biggest thing, but also like he brings a championship caliber program to UCF. And I think that's something that Knights fans are going to love. And obviously he's saying all the right things with, I'm going to be here to see UCF get into the college football playoff. And obviously he's going to say those things, whether he's staying or not. But I think it's just different because you know that he's capable of bringing him there. It's not just talk. So you know that he has the resume to bring you there, and he's not just making stuff up as he goes.
Yeah. Looking around the conference once again, behind Cincinnati and UCF, generally considered the two big dogs. You have sort of a pack with SMU, Houston, Memphis, and I guess you could probably throw Tulsa in there, 3 through 6 in the preseason rankings. Out of those teams, or maybe there's someone below them that you've looked at. Out of those teams, which of them have do you think the greatest potential to be a Tulsa of last year and kind of splash onto the scene and surprise some people?
I think if you're going for big surprise, I'd go Tulane. So to a team that's not in those teams that you just mentioned. If Michael Pratt takes a step forward, this is going to be a very dangerous team. They're very experienced on defense. They have a ton of skilled players on offense as well. And if Pratt takes a step forward, they really could be that team. One of the teams in that list that you mentioned, I'm really high on this year. I might actually put them number 2 as the season approaches, is SMU. Even with a new quarterback running the show, whether that's Tanner Mordecai or incoming freshman Preston Stone, I think that offense is going to put up a ton of points. They have a ton of wide receivers. They're super deep at running back. Their whole offensive line returns. Their tight end position will be deep as well. I think they're just loaded. And it kind of reminds me of the 2017 UCF team. That offense was essentially unstoppable. And while the defense wasn't exactly elite, they were very opportunistic with turnovers. So SMU is kind of in that same boat where when you look at SMU's defense, you don't think, oh man, it's going to be really tough to move the ball on them. But if they're able to find a way to turn the ball over to their offense and let them do most of the work, I think this is a very dangerous team. And if you're scoring 50 plus points a game and you're giving up about 20 to 25, you're going to have some exciting games. But if you're able to turn the ball over and give your elite offense a chance to do work, then I think you're going to be a good spot. So I'd say SMU and Tulane are probably the two teams that I'm going to pick as surprise teams this year.
Which teams are the most vulnerable to regression this year?
Oh man, I think Memphis, and I've been getting a lot of crap for this ever since I did my too early. It's just, here's the thing.
The flack has been coming at you from Tennessee. It's been crazy.
Right? I know. And it's funny because it was very quiet when I was on the Riley Ferguson, Anthony Miller, Darrell Henderson bandwagon for so long. It's like, oh, well, he's supporting us. We don't need to talk about it. But as soon as you put Memphis below 4th or something, all of a sudden it's Joe hates the Tigers and Joe doesn't want them to do any good. It's like, no, I'm a big fan of what they're doing. I just don't see right now how they're a competitive team when you look at the rest of the conference. We talked about Cincinnati, absolutely loaded. Talked about UCF, ready for a bounce back year. SMU is going to score 1 billion points this year. Tulane has a chance to be really good. Tulsa returns a lot of players on both sides of the ball. Houston, no idea what they're going to be. If you want a deep breakdown, I have no idea because no one has any idea what Dana Holgerson is doing. Maybe they'll be good. Maybe they won't. I don't know. ECU is a team that's like a high ceiling, low floor kind of team. So I have no idea what they're going to be. It just, I don't know. I think Memphis is just there because Ryan Silverfield didn't really impress me in his first year, which there's not a lot of first year coaches that you're like, dang, he's going to be the best coach of all time. But I just 8-3. It wasn't really an impressive 8-3. They played, it was like USF, Navy, and Temple, and they won those games by a combined like 10 points or something like that. And it was like, that's not a team on the way up. That's a team taking a couple steps back.
Yeah.
They have a new quarterback coming in. They couldn't run the ball to save their life last year. Their defense returns a lot of players, but they also weren't exactly an elite defense either. So I pick Memphis. I'm not saying that they're going to drop to the bottom of the conference, but when you look at what they're competing against, it's going to be really tough for them to win those games.
Who do you think has the best defense in the conference?
Oh, Cincinnati. It's not even a question. Like, there's such a big gap between Cincinnati and everybody else. It's almost kind of laughable at this point. But I do like a lot of, if Tulsa had Allie Green and a Caleb Evans coming back, they would be very, very close. But because they lose David Collins and they lose their top two cornerbacks, and now they have like no experience out there, that kind of hurts them. But they'll be stingy, as UCF fans know. They'll cause some problems. I think a team to watch out for that could be a big riser is ECU. I think their front four needs a little bit of work, but their back seven is very talented and could be very explosive. And then I'll even throw Tulane in there as another potential surprise team as well. I like what they have at linebacker. They get Memphis transfer Joseph Dorcius to add to their defensive line, and their DBs are experienced, and they get a transfer in Darian Rakeshaw from Colorado that I'm excited about. So there's a couple teams, but I think that Cincinnati is head and shoulders above everybody else, and it's really not that close.
Boy, it feels like Cincinnati and UCF are on this collision course for that October 16th game at Nippert, at least right now. But, UCF's opener against Boise State on that Thursday night, September 2nd, is probably one of the biggest non-A5, cross-sectional matchups that we've seen in a while. I know you pay mostly attention to the American, but at Underdog Dynasty, you guys cover, everybody who's in the group of five, including Boise. Could that game be the real bellwether for shaking out the group of five that even though it's that early?
It could be. I think Boise State, because San Jose State and Nevada kind of surprised people last year, I think everybody kind of thought that, or kind of lost track of who Boise State was and what they're doing. And now Andy Avalos comes in as a first-year head coach, and Gus Malzahn comes in as a first-year head coach for UCF. I think that's not like a huge factor because you still have a ton of talent for both teams. But it's huge for the AAC because the Mountain West is the next conference below them, and then obviously there's a gap between them and the other three. But I think that the Mountain West also really likes to point out how the AAC struggles in bowl season. But you don't really mention the fact that the Mountain West isn't exactly playing in the New Year's Six Bowl very often. But I still like the Mountain West. They're super fun to watch. Boise State obviously has their history, everybody knows. And I think it's going to be one of the best games of the weekend. I know everybody's talking about Georgia and Clemson and Miami, Alabama. You can even look at Ohio State, Minnesota as a game that people are going to watch. But I think one of the things that people miss out on in the college football experience is these group of five games that feature top teams. And just because they're not a top college football team doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a bad game. Boise State's super talented. UCF obviously is super talented. I think it's going to be one of the best games of the weekend. And I did a college football preview back in May, and it was one of my top games for the group of five because it's a great way to start the season. It's the group of five equivalent to me of Clemson, Georgia. It's one of those two high-powered teams that are at the top of the group of five. And I think we're going to get a really exciting game.
Boy, I know that we can't wait for that down here because we should have full capacity for that game. Thursday night national TV. It feels like there's so much energy from the past, 18 to 24 months that has just been. They can barely keep the cap on the can. I know that the bounce house is going to be. It could be one of the wildest nights that we've seen in the bounce house in quite some time. Let me zoom out and talk about the conference in general and we're going to touch the third rail with realignment here because, obviously you can't, we're all contractually obligated to talk about it on any podcast. But with regards to the American specifically, obviously we talked about how, or it's been well documented that Bob Bowlesby, the commissioner of the Big 12, actually more or less directly accused the American of interfering with the Big 12 and trying to recruit somewhere between 3 or 5 or maybe the all 8 remaining teams. We were actually recording our podcast last week when Dennis Dodd started tweeting everything that was apparently coming out of Bob's mouth that evening. Obviously, the American denies it. Mike Resco denied it quite vehemently today. Let's put it this way. 5 years from now, 2026, how many former members of the Big 12 Conference will be in the American Athletic Conference? Or, in your opinion, how many members of the American may join the remaining 8?
Well, here's the thing. I'll answer that second one first.
Okay.
Why? I don't see a reason why the AAC members would join if it's true and Oresco's tampering with the Big 12, like why would the AAC teams want to go to the Big 12 when their commissioner's like, hey, I'm making our conference stronger. I'm going to bring these teams in. And you already have some, some with Baylor, TCU, Oklahoma State. Those are already teams that are in states where you're located. So you don't have to expand your reach. If you really want to keep this random Northeast team and add West Virginia, so Temple and West Virginia are up there, you can add them. I don't see that as very likely. I'd rather see West Virginia go to the ACC. But I think that I would really like Oklahoma State. I think that would be really fun to have them. Mike Gundy would be another great personality to have in the conference. Then I don't know. Baylor doesn't really move the meter for me as much, especially after the Art Briles situation. But obviously they're trying to move on from that. But I don't know. That program doesn't really do much for me. TCU has always been one of my favorites, so I'd really like to see them get added. Texas Tech obviously is there. Like I said, it's all there. I don't want really anything to do with Kansas. I don't really care that Kansas basketball is really good. Like they can go be bad in another conference. They can go to the Big Ten, which sounds like maybe they in Kansas State reached out to the Big Ten. I don't know. Here's the thing. The Big 12 blaming the AAC is kind of like you and someone in high school getting beat up by their bully. And then because their friends laughing at them, they take it out on them. It's like, so you're mad at the AAC for taking teams that aren't your biggest brands, but you are not going to say one word to the SEC, who's taking the 2 programs that are keeping your conference afloat. And people have been saying even before this happened that if you took Oklahoma and Texas away from the Big 12, that this would happen. Mm-hmm. And now it's actually happening. And I don't really feel bad for them at all. And the AAC's actually been trying to make moves to strengthen their conference as a whole. And I feel like the Big 12 has just been, well, we have Texas and Oklahoma. We don't really need anything else. So it's kind of like if you sit around and wait long enough, something bad's going to happen.
Yeah, I think a lot, those of us who've been following college football for, a long time. And I remember when the SEC actually expanded to 12 and started holding their championship game. I think a lot of us were surprised at how ill-prepared the remainder of the Big 12 seemed to be. And it's like, why were you blindsided by this? We knew this was a possibility. And I think you're right about the American that's been, working really hard to strengthen the conference that when it started had, basically, and, was pulled from the wreckage of the now former Big East, basically didn't have a television contract at all. Now they have, and then we did an analysis of all the games on TV in terms of viewership that involved Big 12 teams not named Texas or Oklahoma. And it turns out that the American Athletic Conference's teams over the past 5 years, 2020 notwithstanding, I think you got to throw that out because of the craziness that happened with the inventory. But, when you look from 2016 to 2019, the American gained on and then passed those remaining 8 Big 12 teams in terms of average viewership per game. So now when you zoom out and see what's going to happen between now and 2025, and I think you probably agree with me that I don't think Texas and Oklahoma are going to stick around that long, although they could if they wanted to. I don't think they want to. I don't think ESPN wants them to. Where does what do you think ESPN decides to do? Because it feels like they're the ones pulling the levers here. And the American, to their credit, is locked in on the worldwide leader until the 2030s right now. So that's some pretty good financial security, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Well, and if you look at like outside of maybe 2014 when you had Baylor and TCU, which Big 12 even botched that because they didn't have a Big 12 championship game. Yeah. And honestly, either one of those teams could have won the national championship that year. So
and neither of them got invited.
Right. And that's, that was right when I saw that, I was like, this 4-team playoff is going to be a problem, but that's not what we're here to talk about. But then the last few years, it's just been, hey, Oklahoma is really good. Okay. What else do you have? And while people laughed at, people are mad at Oresco for things that he's done or not done. But one thing that he did do is he pushed this Power Six narrative till it was in the ground, and then he grabbed a shovel and dug even deeper because he believed in it. He knew that if you make enough noise, people are going to pay attention to you. And because money talks, the more you pay attention to a conference, the more money is going to come your way. And then the fact that UCF went along with it and in 2017 claimed their national championship, and a national championship that I acknowledge because because college football system is stupid and we don't allow the teams that deserve to compete for a national championship to actually compete for one. Yes, UCF won a national championship. Get over it. And honestly, more people, I'm getting into a college football playoff, Jeff. You got me heated about the college football playoff now.
Bring it. We're here for it.
More people talk about UCF's national championship than the team that actually, and I'm putting air quotes for people who can't see me, actually won the national championship that year. And so we just overlook the fact that people make UCF 2017 national championship jokes more than they bring up who actually won the national championship that year. So honestly, in terms of marketing, it's been one of the best things. And whether they've tampered or not, they put themselves in a great position because they made noise in the college football world, whether they were winning or not. And I'm not surprised that the Big 12 is in this position because all they did was like, hey, we got Oklahoma, we're good. Well, what happens when you don't have Oklahoma? Mm-hmm. And now they're seeing, well, we don't have that. And I get a little worried, though, with ESPN being able to pull the strings like this because now with the NCAA kind of losing their power, we're essentially just seeing ESPN take over because ESPN holds a lot of control in college football. Yeah. They have the SEC network. They have the ACC network. They have the Longhorn network, which is also the stupidest network that they have. I don't know why they have that.
I think they're getting ready to ditch that once Texas joins the SEC.
And I heard something about they still owe Texas like $160 million for the Longhorn network. And so if Oklahoma and Texas decide to leave early and they have to pay what it was like $80 million a piece or something like that, Texas might just be like, hey, ESPN, you owe us $160 million. Just put that on our tab and we'll call it even. So it's like, If Texas wants to help Oklahoma, they definitely have a way to do that. But I'm a little concerned that ESPN becomes essentially the new NCAA in terms of how much power they have, how much control they have over the whole situation. I would like to see maybe, Fox, CBS, somebody else start. Fox is trying to do a little bit more, but I would like to see maybe a little more balance in terms of what we're trying to watch. But then again, that also probably means that I have to watch freaking Peacock because NBC wants to put Notre Dame Toledo on Peacock or what is, I mean, I know ESPN's doing ESPN Plus, but it's like, who watches Peacock? Honestly, like
I don't blame them for putting Notre Dame and Toledo on Peacock. I'm gonna get ticked off if they put like Notre Dame and Michigan on Peacock or something.
Right?
Like that. You know what I mean?
Something you actually want to watch, and it's like, well, the thing is too, like 2 years ago, or maybe it was 3 years ago, whenever Kyler Murray, I don't know, all the Oklahoma quarterbacks are just basically the same at this point because they just shred everybody. But when Kyler Murray was at Oklahoma and they played Army. And it was a game that wasn't on national TV. It was on some like specific network and you had to pay like $55. Do you know how many people paid $55 just to watch the last 2 minutes of that game? Like every single The Athletic reporter, every single ESPN reporter, like I paid the $55 to watch it. I'm like, you are the people that are going to make me pay for Peacock to watch friggin' Notre Dame, Michigan. Like, what is this? I can't stand it. But yeah, my concern is that ESPN is getting a little too much power. And while we are, labeling NCAA as the bad guy, we might have a new bad guy that we have to worry about because they're just going to, hey, we're going to make the SEC into this 20-team league and it's just going to be NFL junior. And yeah, I can watch everybody else if I really want to, but like I still want to watch those teams. But do I want to watch Texas go 7-5 and make the 12-team playoff because they lost to Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M? No, I don't want to watch that. That's stupid. Like, don't join a conference just because, like, you're just going to do this to make a little bit more money. And I know it's millions of dollars, so it's a little exaggeration, but I don't want to watch that. I want to watch good teams compete at a high level. And I want to see Oklahoma and Texas stay in the Big 12. I know that's not going to happen, but if it doesn't, then yeah, let's let the AAC take over for the Big 12, move past the Pac-12 or have the Pac-12 move up, whatever. I just want to see a great blend of something that makes college football great, which there are 130 teams that we get to watch. So yeah, if I want to watch UMass and UConn play because they play this year, then I can. But if it's not going to be relevant, which that one's not, so maybe that's a poor example, but like Boise State UCF is going to be a game that's super important in college football. And I feel like people aren't going to watch them because they don't care about it because they're not in one of the top 5 conferences in college football this year.
Well, we'll be watching it. That's for sure.
You know what? When it comes around
Thursday,
right.
I'll be there. I'll be there in the stadium. I'm sure you'll be watching from back home. It's going to be a big night. It's so weird how we're now less than a month from that game, and it feels like it almost feels like we didn't have a season last year, even though we did. It's almost like this year does feel like we've been without college football for almost 2 years, and now it's coming back in full swing. So here's having a hopefully a successful college football. So one last thing I want to talk about before we go. The American was pretty clear, and Mike Oresco also was pretty clear today in his press conference about COVID and the fact that he said, look, if you can't play because of a COVID outbreak on your team, you're going to forfeit. We're not going to be rescheduling games. Do you see that as the MO for other leagues going forward?
Yeah, man, it's tough because I feel like teams for the most part have been taking it relatively serious, unless your name's like Nick Rolovich and you don't want to get vaccinated yourself. Right. I'm not here to tell you what get vaccinated or not. You make your own decisions based on what you need to do. But I think that it's going to cause some headaches because especially if, for example, say that this is extreme, but say that Alabama has 2 outbreaks and the SEC says, hey, you're going to forfeit those games. Or say that Cincinnati has 2 outbreaks. So it's related to the AAC. Has a couple outbreaks during the season and they have to forfeit a few games. Well, isn't a team that has 3 forfeits really that much worse than an undefeated team that didn't have to play Cincinnati or something like that? So I think that especially a Cincinnati team that I'm not going to say has a legitimate chance at the playoff, but they're going to push for a playoff spot this year. Mm-hmm. So I think it only really becomes relevant if it's a team that is competing for a college football playoff spot or to move into the top 10. I think that's where really it only matters. But since the bowls have become largely irrelevant at this point in terms of college football overall, I don't think it's going to affect them that much. I think it does incentivize teams to try and get their players vaccinated because, nobody wants to forfeit. All these kids work super hard to play a game that they love, to try and get to the next level. And that's another thing that affects. So there's a lot of seniors that are coming back from a COVID year that they didn't essentially get a full season and they want to play in the NFL. And so if your teammates like, hey, I'm not getting vaccinated, and now because they got COVID, we all have to sit out and forfeit a game, and I don't have one more game of film, especially if that's against a good team. Because if you have to forfeit a game against like Cincinnati, UCF, SMU, you're going to be pissed about that because that's a great chance for you to showcase what you can do at the next level. And I think we saw last year that sometimes that hurts teams because especially, or even if Cincinnati has outbreaks and they can't play Indiana or Notre Dame, like those are huge games that are going to spark outrage. So I think that at the top of everything, and the highest point of college football, or even in the AAC, it's going to be a big headache if it becomes a factor. But I hope it doesn't. I'm going to have my fingers crossed. It sounds like most teams are doing what they need to do, but it's really going to make people mad if it affects them and affects their futures if they're trying to go to the next level.
Boy, I'm with you. And actually, that's a good point. That's an angle I didn't really even think about. It's like, imagine if you were a prospect and you're getting, imagine if you are, Desmond Ridder and you're getting ready to play, a key opponent, and someone comes down with it, you got to forfeit that game. That's going to be a real issue. I hope we don't have to deal with it, because I know everyone's dealt with it this long, but and everyone's just anxious to try and chomping at the bit to get back to normal. But it's one thing where it's not going to happen on its own. People have to be active to advocate for themselves and their health. Joe Broback from Underdog Dynasty, UnderdogDynasty.com. Joe, where can UCF fans find you?
You can find me mostly on my nonsense Twitter account at Joe Broback. It's pretty easy.
I'm not going to accept that. You are an excellent follow on Twitter.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I try not to take it super serious, but at the same, I'm not better than anybody else. I'm just sharing my thoughts. I'm here to have a good time. So if you like college football, give me a follow. I don't care who you're a fan of. I'll talk about it all day. So find me at Joe Broback. Big things coming in 2021.
All right, and also don't forget to read Joe's top 50 AAC players list, a series of 5, 10 in each article. Really good breakdown of some of the talent that we've got in this league coming up. Joe, thanks for your time, man. Always good to see you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks to Joe. Once again, you can find him at Joe Broback on Twitter. Also, make sure you follow Underdog Dynasty for the latest news on the SB Nation Network among teams elsewhere in the Americans. So lots of insight on the conference. I hope you guys all feel adequately prepared, as we're 4 weeks away from kickoff between UCF and Boise State. All right, coming up next, Eric and Drew stop by once again. Well, actually, first we're going to talk with Bryson Turner to update us on the Olympics, and then Drew and Eric and I will wrap things up here on the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Jeff Sharon back with you here, and Bryson Turner is here. You know that because you're hearing the music right now. Bryson following the Olympics for us, as we have just a few days left in the fortnight of Tokyo 2020, which is actually happening in 2021. But plenty of news involving UCF athletes that we wanted to talk about, including perhaps the biggest news of all. UCF graduate Phil Dalhausser, who bowed out along with his partner Nick Lucena in the quarterfinals of the men's beach volleyball tournament to the number 1 team in the world. It should be mentioned, from Qatar, and thereafter Phil announced that he was retiring from the sport of beach volleyball. 41 years old, quite possibly, Bryson, the greatest beach volleyball player ever. Certainly has to be mentioned in the same breath as, Karch Karai, Todd Rogers, a bunch of those other guys. But, obviously a disappointing finish for Phil and Nick. I know that they, really wanted to cap this off with the gold. They really weren't the favorite coming in for gold to begin with, but, there's always the possibility that you can make a run. The run ends. What do you think the legacy is for Phil Dalhausser as his beach career now wraps up with this Olympiad?
Well, I think really a lot of people are going to see Dalhausser as one of the beach volleyball legends from the 2008 Olympics, because the 2008 Olympics was a great Olympics for USA volleyball altogether. Dalhausser winning a gold medal alongside, I believe it was Misty May and Carrie Walsh.
Yep.
Carrie Walsh, I think most people are going to remember him as one of the group that just blazed through the 2008 Olympics. And beyond that, it's nothing to be ashamed of what he did afterwards. He made the medal round in all 4 of his Olympic appearances, which is definitely no easy feat to have. Unfortunately, this Olympics just comes kind of shades this 2012 appearance where the exact same thing happened where in the round of 16, they came across a younger team that just didn't work. And I will say this though, looking at the stats from the game, it wasn't like they weren't completely overpowered. They won
right. It was tight. It went to 3. So.
Yeah, they won the first set 21-14. The set 2 was 21-19. In the end, Qatar just outlasted them, and so if you have to get outlasted in order to get beat, then especially against the number 1 team in the world, that's definitely no easy feat. Right now, Qatar is scheduled to play the Russian Olympic Committee team in the semifinals, and I would not be surprised if they won gold. And hey, I mean, if you end up losing to the eventual medal winners, I mean, there's really no shame in that.
So again, congrats to Phil. He was a guest on our show last year, in fact, just prior to the shutdown when he was doing that exhibition down in Lake Nona. He's going to move into coaching. He's got his own beach volleyball academy down there, and it'll be interesting to see what the next act is for Phil, a legend in the sport of beach volleyball and a UCF Knight through and through. Speaking of, I guess you could say disappointing finishes, but Maddie Rogers, the weightlifter who just recently graduated, had she posted on Instagram after her. I believe she finished. Where did she finish, Bryson, in the competition? Was it 5th? I think
she finished 6th. Actually,
6th. Okay.
Yep, she had a 108 kilogram snatch lift and a 138 clean and jerk lift. Though of the 3 lift chances that she got to lift in each discipline, she only managed to successfully lift 1 time. So
right,
just 1 time in each one. So definitely.
Sorry. Go ahead. So.
No, go ahead. You were saying something.
Well, I was going to say her story ended up becoming much bigger than what her performance was, and this is I think
yes.
with Simone Biles, mental health has become a tremendous story in the Olympics, and the struggles that a lot of high level competitive athletes go through, regardless of what sport they're in, what level they compete at. And Maddie posted on her Instagram after the conclusion of the competition. You never expect to have this is Maddie Rogers speaking on Instagram. You never expect to have your worst day on what was supposed to be your best day. I have never been in better shape and more prepared for any event. I have never been more confident going into an event, but it just happened to not be my day today. She goes on to mention that she was 10 kilograms lighter at least than everyone else in the field. She never expected to be. She said, "I never expected to be fighting just to make a single attempt. While I can't help but feel crushed and disappointed in myself, I'm proud that I'm even here. It was a major kick in the not to have been able to qualify in a class closer to my own to go head to head with athletes of my size, and I thought I had fully come to terms with it, but that was also not the case. I had every intention of proving myself on that stage today and showing that no matter what gets thrown at me, I can overcome." And this is the last thing I wanted to mention because I think this is so important. For those who also suffer from anxiety, please know you're not alone. Sometimes it attacks full force even when you've done everything and used all your tools to prevent that from happening. This is a lesson to myself and others that mental illness can come knocking at the most inconvenient times. But you can get through it, and it's okay. It doesn't make you any less of a person, or in my case, athlete. For me, this was the push I needed to take the next steps of my mental health journey to get things a little more under control. And for that, I am grateful. Unfortunate timing, but I know this experience will only help me in the long run. Thank you for your love and support today and always. Obviously, I'm skipping over a bunch of things, but I thought that was really poignant to what Maddie said. It's you don't always expect to have, like you said, your worst day on what's supposed to be your best day, and I really applaud her for drawing attention to in her own way to mental health. It's one thing if someone who's like the face of the Olympics, like Simone Biles who's such a familiar name, brings attention to it, and obviously I'm not saying that's not important, but there are a lot of other stories that don't get covered where that people need to know about. And it's not just the people at the highest level of the highest level. It's people who maybe not as many people who have heard it, but are still dealing with the same issue like Maddie Rogers is. So, what's the end result here? It's even though she finished in sixth, I felt like she really won the day here in bringing some awareness to mental health in the way that she did.
Oh, yes. I would definitely not call Maddie Rogers' performance a complete disappointment by any means. The fact that this was not her weight class at all. I'm looking at NBCSports.com's start weight, because they had this when the competition was going on. In her group A, which is what her group was when she was competing, her body weight was listed as 78.55 kilograms. The next lightest person in that group was 84.05 kilograms. Major outlier there. Yet she still managed to finish in sixth place, and actually 1 kilogram away from fifth place. And this is something that I said on Twitter, but I want to reiterate here. So the fifth place finisher, who finished 1 kilogram ahead of Maddie Rogers, is a 33-year-old French woman named I won't try to pronounce her name because I'm probably going to get it wrong, but she is 33, and she managed to beat her Maddie by 1 kilogram, and Maddie is 25. Even in this weight class, which isn't her own, with the fact that she was finished pretty much right on par with someone who's at 33. I think that this is far from the last time that we're going to see Maddie Rogers here. Was it inconvenient this time? Of course it was. One quote from her Instagram post that you didn't say that I think is actually very telling is, she said, "I put everything being capitalized, into being here today. I just wish my brain had been on the same page." And watching her live, there's a clip of her on NBCOlympics.com that you can probably watch. She was very emotional when she came back from lifting that 138 kilogram clean and jerk, because she had already attempted it twice beforehand, and she wasn't able to do it. And it's not like she wasn't able to lift 138 pounds. It's just that you have to have certain qualifications in order to make it a clean lift. And so getting it on that third try, though, you could see that she was just grateful to get it on that third try, especially the fact that this was a class that wasn't her own. So I think the big takeaway here is, yes, she managed to draw attention to mental health issues, in this case, anxiety. And the fact that she was still able to overcome the fact that she was in a class that wasn't her own, and managed to finish in sixth place, very close to a top 5 too. So I would say that this isn't going to be the last time we hear of Maddie Rogers. If someone at the age of 33 can come back from a almost career-ending injury, that was one thing that they were talking about. The French woman had a nearly career-ending injury a while ago, and she came back. That was one of the big stories of this competition. But if she can come back and do that, then a 25-year-old Maddie Rogers, and I could see her working her way up and making the Paris Olympics and succeeding in that one, especially, I think, if she's able to qualify in her own weight class. Although even that might not be able to stop her, considering what we saw here in this Olympics.
Oh yeah, we haven't heard the last of Maddie Rogers, I'm sure. And the bet, this is one of those things where, yeah, of course the Olympics were delayed by a year, but the good thing is, for a lot of these athletes who want another shot at it, you only have to wait 3 years, not 4 this time around. Let's talk about Kristen Thomas on the rugby side of things. Had a very good Olympiad, 3 tries in one match, and really was a star for USA Rugby, wasn't she?
Yes, she was. She had 3 tries over the whole tournament. Both were in games against China, actually. To basically give a small recap, the United States managed to make the medal round, and they ended up losing in the quarterfinals to Great Britain, 21-12. So then they were placed into a bracket where they were determined 5th through 8th place. So that first game they had to play against China, who they had already played in group play. And the very first, and Kristen Thomas in that game scored the very first try for the United States in the entire tournament. So great job for her to get that. And then in this first game in the 5th through 8th place bracket, they went up against China once again, and she got 2 tries. So So very well done. It's Kristen Thomas seemed to have had the Chinese team's number there. And beyond that, she was on the field for a lot of the time in this tournament. She actually did not play in the final game it was a game to determine who finished 5th and 6th against Australia. But considering her performance against China, and if you were watching that game, Kristen worked her butt off in that game. So she definitely earned a game off, especially if this was a game to determine 5th through 6th place. And while they did lose to Australia in that game, let me see here it is. The score was 17-7 in Australia's favor. I would say finishing 6th is definitely not anything to be ashamed of, especially since rugby is not exactly, the very prominent sport in the United States. The teams right now, the gold medal was won by New Zealand, and Fiji won the bronze medal. And considering that Fiji has only ever won medals for rugby, I think it kind of just speaks to, even though rugby is not the most prominent sport in the United States, we still have some very talented rugby players like Kristen Thomas on our team. So very well done for Kristen. Represented UCF very well. And I'm excited to see what they could do next in France, because I imagine that we'll be in France as well. And France actually won the silver medal for this event. So it should be very interesting to see where they go with that.
One last active athlete that we want to talk about, Alini Reyes, who unfortunately did not get a chance to take the pitch for Brazil. They got knocked out in the quarters?
Yes, they got knocked out in the quarterfinals against Canada in penalty kicks. It was a 4-3 penalty kicks, actually. Basically, Brazil made their first 3 but missed their last 2, while Canada missed their first one but made their last 4. So Brazil. But
Alini was not in goal for that.
No, she was not. It was unfortunate we could not get to see her. She was among the possible substitutes for the final group play game, but because the Brazil never really got a big enough lead, I think is why they decided to not substitute her in. So it's just so sad to not see her in this games, but we'll still be keeping an eye on the Brazil international team as they compete in other events, and we might just see Alini in one of them, maybe in Paris 2024 as well.
All right. There is one more athlete that we have yet to see. He is a Paralympian. Is that right, Bryson?
Yes, indeed. Kyle Coons. I believe we've said before that he is going to be competing on August 22nd, roughly. So I'll be following that, and I'll be very excited to see how he does. All
right. Well, Bryson Turner, thank you so much for giving us a little update on the on UCF's Olympians as the Olympics wrap up. The second week of everything, you'll be recapping that, I believe, in a little bit more depth on the site. Is that right?
Yes, I will. I am currently finishing up the summer B semester at UCF, but once that is finished, then I will get that up, and also I'll be covering Kyle Coons on Twitter, which is at it's Bryson Turner. The B and T are capitalized once he competes, and yeah.
All right, thank you, Bryson. We'll see you again later down the road. All right.
All right.
All right, thanks again to Bryson. Let's wrap up with some other news. We're finally getting some schedules put together, boys.
It's August. We better.
I know. It's like, we better hurry up because it's coming around the corner. By the way, the first UCF sporting event, at least that we know of as of right now, is just 4 days away. It's the women's soccer team. They're playing an exhibition against FAU at home on August the 8th. They have 2 exhibition games on consecutive weekends. Home for FAU August the 8th. That's this Sunday, 4 p.m. Then they're at Miami Saturday at 1. That's August the 14th. They officially open up the season Thursday, August the 19th against Texas. That's a 6 p.m. kickoff for Tiffany Roberts-Sahadak's team. Listen to this out-of-conference slate, boys. You ready? This is the regular season. Home for Texas, at Florida. Home for LSU, at Ohio State. Home for Penn State, at Ole Miss. Home for North Carolina. Eric, we got to get Tiff on the show here because we always joke with her about how she is her scheduling philosophy can best be described as masochistic. And boy, did she outdo herself this year, man. Holy smokes.
Yeah, no, it's a very attractive non-conference schedule. What's going to be fascinating about this, and it's for for volleyball included, the word I think of is fatigue. Will there be fatigue from playing a spring season? Obviously, women's soccer had a tough spring. That counted. You're not used to that. So how will the players be mentally and physically going into this fall after a quick turnaround here? Now, for women's soccer, they got 10 newcomers. They got some players that did not participate in the spring. This is the class that has been well recognized among some of her, maybe Coach Sahedek's one of her better recruiting classes. So I think that's the bright side. But you mentioned that's a very difficult schedule with Texas right away. Penn State probably be top 25. Carolina speaks for itself, obviously. But at least they'll have a non-conference. You're not going straight to conference. So I think you have time to kind of get this chemistry together that they just didn't have in the spring. Can they get this group alongside players like Madison Murnan, who returns, and Ellie Moreno, as well as Katie Bradley, had a good first year. Can they all click? They'll have time to do it. Tough schedule, obviously. LSU comes in as well. But I think I'm very interested to see about fatigue. How do the teams look? We've seen this. Will injuries play a role? I'm very interested in it. But look, it's an important year for women's soccer trying to bounce back. And along with baseball, boys, now the longest drought on campus to make the NCAA tournament, 2017.
Yeah, isn't that true though? That that's going to be such a huge factor for these fall sports. Both soccers. And volleyball in particular is the fact that they're heading into the fall from playing in the spring. Granted they didn't play as many games or matches, but that doesn't make it any less grueling. Especially given all of the troubles that everybody had with getting conditioning right and whatnot. This is going to be a huge factor. I mean, the thing is that it may indeed vary from one place to another based on how many games were played. And whatnot. So this is going to be that's such a tremendous factor. Volleyball, by the way, men's soccer schedule not out just yet. I imagine we're going to get that.
And guys, don't forget, there's that big heavyweight showdown with Stetson. You can't write that one off.
Oh, we never write that one off. That's another midweek there, non-conference, September the 19th. By the way, Memphis comes here this year, and so does South Florida. But UCF wraps the season at Cincinnati. Usually they have South Florida to wrap the season, but Cincinnati.
No, that's interesting. You're right. That is they've kind of done the last few years, South Florida, UCF have finished against each other. But you bring up a good point. Memphis and USF have been the top two programs the last few years. This is the year, in the odd years, where UCF gets them at home. So that's a big plus. And again, I think Coach Sahedek hopes she gets some answers from a team. But they go to Ohio State, Drew. They go to Ohio State Thursday, September 2nd.
Man.
Like, what do you mean? No, Ohio State, no.
Well, no. The problem is it's at the same time as the Boise State football game.
That's right, 7:00.
It's at the exact same time. That's the problem because I would love to watch that one. So, watch my childhood team face my adult team. But unfortunately, it's not meant to be.
Bummer.
You'll be busy, hopefully, watching football there. But obviously, they go to Florida. By the way, this is the post-Becky Burley era. Becky Burley retired from Florida. Interestingly, though, her retirement did not only lasted 4 months. She's now the head coach of the Orlando Pride in the Pro League, which is kind of funny. So, it's a challenging schedule per usual for Coach Sahedek.
All right. One other schedule that got released, and this is the one that I'm, of course, looking at. It's the volleyball schedule. They start out Friday they actually have what they call preseason tournaments. Really, it's your non-conference tournaments. It's these round-robin tournaments where you invite 3 other teams over. They have their scrimmage on Saturday the 21st, but they start with a home tournament, and here's who they're bringing in: Georgia Tech, St. John's, Penn State. 3 massive programs. Then they head to South Carolina where they face Clemson and then South Carolina twice the following weekend. That's the Labor Day weekend. So September, they're actually playing across from the football opener too on Thursday, September the 2nd at 7 p.m. At South Carolina. Then they play the Gamecocks again at 7:30 the following day. They actually play Clemson to open Thursday at noon. Back home for the UCF Invitational, Florida Gulf Coast, Florida State, Georgia. Again, heavyweights. Don't sleep on Florida Gulf Coast. We know what they did to us a couple years ago. And then finally, the Sunshine Classic, which is I believe this is the fourth year in a row that we've had that we've had this group. It was kind of a rotating tournament contract. Miami, Florida Gulf Coast, and Florida Atlantic to start out the season. Again, round robin play in the American this year. South Florida comes to town on Wednesday, November 17th. UCF goes to Tampa on October the 13th. And then 2 dates with Cincinnati, September 26th at home. That's the second conference match of the year. And then at Cincinnati, November 5th. The home season wraps up November 19th. That's a Friday against Temple.
Midweek volleyball this year.
Yeah.
That's a little unique, different. I'm curious about that move. Playing some midweeks, granted, that's a very interesting curve. Obviously,
well, I think they're doing it for the. There might be some. Well, I think one of them has to do with the Thanksgiving holiday because November 24th, Wednesday, they're playing at Tulane. That's the second to last match of the year. And then Friday, November 26th, so the day after.
Yeah, it seems like they want to get everything in before Thanksgiving. Obviously, there will be
which
no
which they always do. They always do. No conference tournament this year. That's right.
Yeah, no conference tournament. Obviously, Penn State. I mean, you could argue that Penn State is the greatest women's volleyball program in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Right up there. That'll be exciting on Saturday. Look, same thing with this volleyball team. Fatigue. Volleyball, especially a physical sport. How do they, going from spring to fall will be fascinating. This core returns out of that. Can they get that bad taste out of their mouth after the loss to High Point? Can they put that behind them, or does that linger? Those are some of the questions. Obviously, McKenna Melville, this is her senior year, possibly her last year. I don't know how that works with the extra year, but it could be. You have to treat it that way because she is a senior. You just don't know. That's a legendary player. Will probably end up possibly the chase right now for the all-time kills record. She's going to end up healthy, be one of the 6 UCF players over 1,000 kills and 1,000 digs. She's right now writing her bio to be in the conversation for the greatest volleyball player ever. This could be possibly the final chapter. Who knows? But obviously a challenging schedule, which Todd likes to do. And I think he even acknowledged, I remember after the High Point match, he had acknowledged that he thought it hurt them that they didn't have that non-conference in the spring. It didn't get them prepared for a match like High Point in the NCAA tournament, which I thought was an interesting comment there. So they will have that luxury. Again, it's worth a mission to see a McKenna Melville type because we don't know how often those come around. But a challenging schedule. And again, fatigue is so interesting. Obviously, you follow this. Obviously, one of the bigger stories in the Olympics for volleyball, Jordan Thompson injured during the Olympics. That could decide the fate of the Americans, whether they win the gold or not in women's volleyball if she returns from her injury. Volleyball, things like that could change the a course of a season.
Not only do you have the fatigue issue, you have the weight of having to defend multiple back-to-back conference championships.
Repeat, yeah.
So you've got a lot of weight on the shoulders of that team. The pressure just gets that much higher. Everyone's got the same fatigue question, but you've got this king-size bullseye because everyone wants to take down Goliath.
Well, and that's a great point you make, Drew, because, Jeff, if you notice that schedule, at Tulane, at Houston to finish here, you can make the argument. That's the 2 biggest threats to UCF. I think the conference clearly, I don't think that was by accident. Some would say Houston was the second best team. They kind of faded at the end. Some would say Tulane was the second best team. They pushed UCF to the limit in the semis in the spring. You could argue if you did a preseason rankings, it's UCF, Houston, Tulane with, you could argue between Tulane and Houston, and UCF has to finish on the road. The conference championship could be decided on the road.
Right. And that's where it would be decided because there, like you said, there is no tournament. By the way, get used to the following term here, guys. 5th year. Not a redshirt senior, not a senior, a 5th year player. That's officially what Anne-Marie Watson and Amari Williams are being classified as their returners who are playing their 5th year and got the extra year due to COVID. Officially, like we said, McKenna Melville is listed as a senior on the roster. So is Tali Marmon, Amber Olsen. This is a group that has won so much and is ready for, but has seen a little bit of disappointment here and there. Catherine Westlich, also can't forget her, and Narissa Moravec, who's officially listed as a redshirt senior. But I think that they still have one of the things that that the coaches said afterwards was, it's kind of a good thing that the season is happening so soon after the disappointing loss in the first round of the NCAA to High Point, in that the bitter taste of that loss is still fresh in their minds. But again, fatigue obviously going to be a factor, longer schedule, more traveling this year, obviously, because you're playing that. You remember last year they split the American basically into 2, and you played double headers in the same site. So there wasn't a lot of traveling. This year's a lot more traveling. You're playing full round robin in volleyball in the American this year because there's no conference tournament. So this is going to be quite a grind for this team as they get ready to try and defend 3 consecutive American Athletic Conference championships and try and win a 4th. They're looking to be the first team since Laura Smith's head coach Laura Smith's teams in the mid-90s to win 4 consecutive conference championships in volleyball. Wow, this is going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to be doing a full preview of all your fall sports coming up in the coming days and weeks. And we're aiming to interview all the head coaches.
You heard that, Roxy? You've been asking about those. It's coming.
I know it's coming, Roxy. We got you. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to seeing what the coaches have to say about this crazy summer that we're having and what their preparations are for this year. It was so difficult for everyone last year, but I'm sure that they just are as anxious to get back to quote normal end quote as the rest of us. So it'll be fun to talk to them. All right, boys. So let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. We can follow each of us on Twitter individually: Jeff_Sharon, Eric Lopez Elo, Statboy Drew. You can follow Black and Gold Banneret at UCF_Banneret on Twitter and at Facebook.com/Black and Gold Banneret. And of course, don't forget blackandgoldbanneret.com, where we are SB Nation's home for your UCF Knights. In addition, if you subscribe to this podcast, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Make sure you tell a UCF fan friend in your life and recommend it to them. If you do not subscribe to this podcast, make sure you do via Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, you can do so on Spotify or wherever fine podcasts are given away for free. If you do subscribe, just please leave a rating as well and a comment. Let us know how we're doing, and you can always reach out to us, like you said, on Twitter, where our DMs are open. So for Andrew Glukov and Eric Lopez, I'm Jeff Sharon. We'll catch you next week here on the Black Gold Banneret Podcast.